Today is Sunday, April 16th, and you're listening to Plastic Weekly. I'm back. Today you get to listen to an interview I recorded last weekend in Meiringen, Switzerland with Eddie Fowke, Palacio, and Graeme Alderson. Stick around. Well, what a week it's been. The IFSC gave up free live streaming. Everybody got angry. Bunch of protests. They reneged on it. We had our first World Cup of the season. New rules instituted. It's been a lot of action in the last week, and I've been sad I haven't been here every Thursday to bring it to you. But I was in Meiringen, Switzerland to see all the action. Fortunately managed to witness all of the streaming stuff go on firsthand. And finally get back on track with this podcast. I'm releasing this on Sunday just because the longer I wait, the less relevant some of it is. But we are going to go back to Thursday morning releases of Plastic Weekly. On today's episode, I managed to sit down with Palacio of OnBouldering.com and Eddie Fowke of the Circuit Climbing magazine, which is at thecircuitclimbing.com. Eddie's also one of the official photographers for the IFSC. In the middle, I throw in a little interview I had with Graeme Alderson, one of the IFSC's prolific technical delegates, because we needed some help from him to understand some history about bouldering formats. So that's just going to pop up right where it becomes relevant. Some of the stuff we talk about is a little bit, I'm not going to say contentious, but it's issues of the moment. And I wanted to make sure that it was clear that Graeme Alderson and Eddie Fowke, who both work for the IFSC and have been doing a lot of work for them for many years, are both speaking from their own opinions and not on behalf of the IFSC. I really appreciate them sitting down to talk with me and give them a lot of knowledge that I didn't have myself, and I want to make sure that the information that they give you is their own personal opinions and their own personal recounts of history, and not them speaking on behalf of the International Federation of Sport Climbing. With that, here's the interview. Again, it was recorded live in between semifinals and finals of the Meiringen World Cup. So you're going to hear a lot of noise in the background. It was really busy. And then I think in the interview with Graeme, you're going to hear some kids running around and hucking soccer balls at each other. So sorry for the background noise, but it was a beautiful World Cup. Meiringen's a beautiful town. If you ever get a chance to go, I definitely recommend it. And with that, here is my interview with Eddie Fowke, Palacio, and special guest appearance by Graeme Alderson. And yes, some of it is already fairly out of date, but get past the first couple minutes and I think you'll find it very interesting and even more relevant for the future. The first Bouldering World Cup is always an exciting event, with new athletes making their big debut, route setters trying to break up a field that has gotten stronger over the break, and new viewers who have discovered the sport over the winter. This year, the IFSC has gone one bigger by making Meiringen the host of controversy and protest. With me right now to talk about the future of climbing as a spectator sport are two of the most familiar names in World Cup coverage, editor-in-chief of the Circuit Climbing magazine and official IFSC photographer Eddie Fowke, and editor of OnBouldering.com, Palacio. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a big weekend with the news of Flow Climbing's streaming deal being announced on Wednesday, followed by backlash from athletes and spectators, followed by a protest at the opening ceremonies, and finally a temporary capitulation from the IFSC, making streaming free again for Meiringen at least. You've both voiced your opinions on the topic already, so I want to ask you, what have we learned about our sport following all of this debate?
Well, I think many of us learned that the IFSC and the climbers are different things, very different things, and that sometimes they can be facing each other.
I think one thing that has really stood out from my perspective is the sense of community that it has shown. It's very easy to look at the negatives and go, this is a very questionable decision and there's major implications for this decision. But if you look at the reaction and how the climbing world as a broader public drew together to show their support of competition climbing and to show their support of the publicity of competition climbing, there's a lot of people that were competitors, obviously, that spoke out, but there was also a lot of people that weren't competitors, that are outdoor professionals who showed a sense of solidarity. In other sports, you don't necessarily see that. Track cyclists aren't going to support road cyclists, aren't going to support mountain bikers, and vice versa. But in climbing, everyone stood together, and it was, I think, for all the chaos and carnage, it's been a fantastic show of community from the climbers themselves.
You talk about a split between the competitors and the IFSC. Do you feel like that's a new thing, or has that been around for a little bit?
For people watching at home, it may be a new thing, but the closer you get to these competitions, the more you get that feeling that there's a disconnect between those who make these shows really happen. I mean, like getting dirty and building things,
doing the work,
doing the work that is more, I'm gonna call it real, and those who maybe work in offices and make decisions and are more close to the politics. But as I said, the closer you get to these events, the more you realize that split. But now I think more people are aware of that, because they saw that pretty much everyone was, first of all, caught by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And they are asking themselves, okay, why didn't the organizers, the officials, knew about this deal? Why didn't the athlete commission know about this deal?
I'm curious if the deal was in the works before the executive board elections or not, but we'll figure that out later. You're both professional. Well, you're a videographer and you're a professional photographer. How does this deal affect your jobs if it's to continue through?
Well, it has major implications for us, but not just us. It's the much broader implications, and we are merely people who are subject to what's going to happen.
Well, I want to focus on you because it changes the nature of how people consume climbing coverage. So now you yourself, you work for the IFSC as one part of your job.
Absolutely, yes. Yep. So I take photos for the IFSC. It's always been a big personal belief of mine and you see it in the way I share photos, that I will sell photos to companies, but for athletes I always give the photos because it's my way of giving back. It's my way of those photos the athletes share give an opportunity for the next generation to look at these amazing photos and be inspired, just like I was by photos of Jerry Moffat, Ben Moon, people like that 15, 20 years ago. And with this disconnect by the decision of the IFSC, it basically shows that their values might not reflect my values. Because I'm all about giving back to the community and being part of the community, and I feel incredibly privileged to be in the position I'm in and to have contact with these incredible athletes, and I like to share that back. And you kind of get the feeling by putting a price tag on that, the IFSC has said that's not their agenda.
Mm-hmm. What about yourself? You are kind of an alternative source for coverage for the World Cups. Do you feel like having limited coverage for the public would actually do better for yourself?
Well, right now I'm limited to record video just to the qualifiers, and that has been the case since 2015. And since the qualifiers are not live streamed, I don't think that the demand for footage from the qualifiers is going to be any greater. But if the only video available from a given competition for free are those that I make, they may increase the viewership. But the problem is that this season they also limited the amount of footage that I can share in my videos to 5 minutes.
Oh. So
5 minutes and problems, that's 30 seconds per problem.
Yeah.
Unless it's a really fast dyno.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to leave some problems out or edit in some way that it's not the coolest way to make a climbing video, but still. I think the issue is also that in the long term, if this doesn't work well, the interest in the World Cup may go down, especially if sponsors stop supporting the local federations and the local organizers that make these competitions possible, because the IFSC doesn't pay for these events. The local organizers have to find the money.
Yeah.
So maybe in a few years, if this goes this way, I hope not, but maybe the World Cups are not that important and that relevant.
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to beat the subject to death because things could change from now today on Saturday and when we publish on Thursday, but I'll just end really quickly with, based on the feedback you've seen from the athletes and the spectators and the organizers, do you expect the IFSC to try and cancel their contract with Flow Climbing earlier than 2019?
I don't think that's something we can speculate on at all, because we have no details of the contract. We don't know the arrangement that's been agreed on. We don't know the financial implications from the IFSC side or anything like that. But I think that it's very important for the sake of the sport that the athletes, the federations, the brands and the free media keep pushing back, that we don't take, well, you gave us one free comp and then roll over backwards. I have had brand after brand message me voicing their concerns, and we're talking major brands. I know athletes that have been messaged by brands saying, do not do interviews, do not talk to anyone because we do not want to associate. And the long-term effect of that is, if this deal continues, those athletes could lose sponsorship, they lose the ability to do the World Cups, World Cup loses field size, World Cup loses organisers, and yeah, it's potentially a very dangerous situation for the sport.
Yeah, I don't think we can speculate because we don't know the details, but I would say that they're gonna try to fix it in some way, to, I don't know, if make it cheaper or find some way to make it more acceptable to the fans. But I don't think they want to just cancel the contract. I would bet that they're gonna try to change it in some way to make it more presentable, because the way they did it this time was so inept, just dropping the bomb 3 days before the competition, and with this price tag of $20 per month. So I think they're gonna try to put it in some better light, maybe make it cheaper, and maybe offering a lot of free content along with the live stream.
Okay. In general, it sounds like you guys think it's more likely that the deal will be possibly tweaked or edited rather than removed completely.
I'd say so.
I think we all have internal hopes, but we're also balanced with reality. This is effectively a political organisation. You know, these guys are run as a board with an elected president, and of course the implication is going to be a couple of years down the line, the next time there's a board election and a presidential election, that, you know, there's potential for a turnover there as well, because the question's got to be asked, are these the people that the sport wants running it?
Okay. We will move on. We're about to see the first World Cup finals using the hard 4-minute format. We're just hours away. The format's been added, presumably to make the finals follow a more predictable schedule. I want to know if you guys think that this change will do what it's supposed to do, or will finals remain relatively hard to schedule accurately?
On its own, it won't. If you keep the competitions as they are and simply apply this rule, it won't make the finals more predictable, because there are so many technical issues usually in the finals with clocks that don't work. We saw it here today in the semi-finals with maybe some problems with some holes, and then you have to repeat the problem, or some decision from a judge that is appealed and you have to repeat the problem, or simply with climbers that don't realize where they have to go or when they have to come out, things like that. That makes the final quite unpredictable, and it's also a problem can be climbed really fast, like in 40 seconds, or can be climbed in 4 minutes, exactly 4 minutes, and that's a big difference. So I don't think it's going to be, just with this rule, it's not enough to make the final predictable.
Yeah, I would agree completely with what Angel says. I think that there is still going to be a large scope of how long a final takes, and there is the question of what to do with that dead time. Going to a fixed time limit in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. Historically, climbers did, or World Cups did, have a hard 5-minute rule before they went to 4+. I just feel that maybe some more experimenting at a regional and national level should have been done with different formats to see what still provided the best show. We haven't really heard any background into what research was done in coming to this conclusion. We just heard the end outcome, and for these athletes that they train for 4+, the set is set for 4+, and yes, the athletes are capable of climbing within a 4-minute route, but as we saw in the Quiff earlier this year, if they set a 2.5-minute slab and you've got 4 minutes, you have one attempt. If you get to the top and fall off the top, you're going to walk off the mats with a minute plus to go. And the feedback we were getting from the crowd there, the feedback we were getting from the spectators, is it looks like the climbers are quitting. And I don't think that is a sentiment we want pervade in the finals. But with tweaking by the setters and with a new approach, maybe it's something that can be workable, because as I said, we did have a fixed 5 minute before. I just think that we I do think that 4 minutes is too short.
When they switched to a 4+ format, do you guys recall any of the same kind of backlash or just resentment towards a new idea at all?
I mean, that was quite a few years ago, so it was, I think, even before the era of live streaming. So myself, coming from New Zealand, I only had what I was reading about either online and print media. The competitors of those days have all since moved on, so we don't have any direct comparison. The only people that still have memories of that are people involved now in the organisation of the sport. So, people like Graeme Alderson, who's the technical delegate at so many of these comps. He's been the judge since World Cup started, and then the technical delegate. So he remembers these changes. Guys like Jerome Meyer, who's the sporting director of the IFSC, he's going to remember the changes. So they would have an inkling, but unless you went to some very old comps.
That's too old for me. I wasn't into the sport back then.
I'll see if I can get Graeme to talk to me for 5 minutes later on about that. And just like that, with me right now to explain some of those questions and answers is technical delegate extraordinaire Graeme Alderson. So starting right off, can you give us a quick history of the evolution of World Cup boulder finals formats?
Well, the World Cup started in 1999 at Benasque. I was the jury president there, and at the time we had 2 rounds. It was 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off for both the qualification and the final. Although it might have been 6 on, 6 off. It's quite a long time ago now. So that was the rule for quite a long time. And then we introduced semi-finals, but still it was the qualification style, 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, even for the finals. And then round about 2005, 2006, there was what was called the boulder format working group formed, and we were looking at ways of improving the overall thing about everything to do with bouldering. So it wasn't just looking at finals, but the basic format stayed the same. So tops, number of attempts, bonus number of attempts stayed the same, but it was thought to change the final, and that's when we came on with the well, I'm not just calling it the 4+, but the general format where it was 1 man, 1 woman, where there was observation as well. So the reason you got 4+ instead of 5+ was it was felt that with observation you didn't need 5 minutes. And I can't actually remember why we decided on 4+. We obviously thought it was a good idea at the time. But the change then between 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, properly on site, just like the qualification, to the collective observation, and therefore obviously collective discussing it in the ISO, that's a really big change. I think it's a way bigger change than what we've just done. Going from 4+ to 4 minutes is nothing compared to going from totally on site to collective observation with discussion.
What prompted the change? So you mentioned this working group back in 2004, 2005. What prompted that need to have a discussion about how you run the boulder format?
Well, I think it was, you still see it with the qualification and the semi-final. At first, in those rounds, there's 1 person on the wall. And then after 10 minutes, there's 2 people on the wall. And then, of course, all the boulders get populated over the first 45 minutes or so. But of course you also get that depopulation, so to speak, at the end of the round. So for the first 45 minutes you don't have everybody climbing. At the last 45 minutes you have boulders that are empty, and that was the issue. It was felt there's nothing happening, so if somebody came out and flashed a boulder in 1 minute, then there's nothing happening for 5 minutes at all, nothing happening on the wall, and the same at the end of it. So it was felt that the new system of having 1 man, 1 woman climbing all the time, there was always somebody climbing, apart from in the obvious changeover period where you brush the holes and things like that. So that was the main reason. Always have somebody climbing, always have somebody on the mats doing something.
At that point, would you be able to kind of give a rough estimate of how many competitors would have been registered for a World Cup?
I would say back in those days, so this was, well, the change was instigated in the 2007 season. So the first actual event was the European Bouldering Championships, which I ran in Birmingham at the National Exhibition Centre. We used to run the World Cup in Birmingham, first event of the season. So any new rules, I had to instigate them. So luckily I also wrote them. So it made life a little bit easier. At least I had some knowledge. But back in those days, I would estimate, this is just totally off the top of my head, you would probably have 60 men, 30 women at an average European World Cup, maybe 40 women. But generally, nowhere near 100 in total. I mean, if you got over 100 men and women, you were doing really well. Whereas now, obviously, we're double that. I mean, here we had 195 registered. Last year in Munich, it was over 200. I mean, and that is actually in itself causing the problem. We're at the limit of what you can do in a single day. The qualification in Munich, I think we finished at 8:45 at night, which in an outdoor comp brings its own problem, because as the sun goes down, the temperature drops, the conditions change.
Now, going back to when you made those changes and comparing it to today, was there kind of as much feedback? And obviously, there weren't as many people commenting on it, and there wasn't as big an audience as there is today. But was there the same kind of backlash or large discussion about the format change back in 2004, 2005, or is this a fairly new thing? What's happening right now?
I'd say the backlash is a new thing. Obviously, I mean, the internet existed back in those days, but nothing like it was now. You didn't have social media. I mean, it was in its infancy. You didn't have people with smartphones who can, you can comment on anything from anywhere in the world now. Whereas before, maybe people, and this is not just about the climbing thing, maybe you thought a little bit more before you posted, because you had to wait till you got home, wait and 10 minutes for your computer to fire up, and you're on rubbish dialing lines. Whereas now, everything is so immediate, the technology's there, people fire off stuff, criticise or praise very quickly. But then, no, you didn't have that kind of instant feedback.
And finally, you were the technical delegate for this event this weekend, and from what I understand, you used the format for the QIF as well a couple weeks ago. Have you noticed any difference in your job, or from the judging perspective? Have any problems come up, or has it been smooth sailing so far, at least from a technical perspective?
From a technical perspective, the new rule change has made zero difference. I mean, obviously, we now have to keep a much closer eye on the athletes with relation to the time, whereas before you just had. Well, actually, before you had to keep a close eye, you had to make sure both feet were off the ground within the 4 minutes. So now all we're doing is checking both hands are on the finish hold. So yeah, we still have one thing to look at in relation to the clock, and it's just now it's hands instead of feet. So no, it hasn't made any difference to us. So yeah, no difference. Here was pretty smooth. I mean, yeah, we had a few glitches, a couple of incorrect judging decisions in the semi-final in particular. I know John Wan was very surprised when he was given top on, I think it was boulder 4 in the men's semi-final, but we quickly overruled the boulder judge's decision on that, and he had to have another go, which of course he did straight away. But yeah, pretty smooth ride here.
Okay, cool. Well, with that, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Graeme Alderson.
You're welcome, Tyler.
Let's say this new format does what it's supposed to do. Let's say it does, to some degree, create a more predictable schedule. Will the benefits of it being more appropriate for television, which there are a lot of benefits in more coverage, will those benefits outweigh the possible negatives of the format, namely what we talked about, less exciting climbing?
I think it's very early to tell, because ideally, the benefits always with increased coverage and an increased audience is increased income into the sport. The more opportunity for these athletes to operate as professionals, the more opportunity for the media, such as Angel and myself, to operate as professionals. And so obviously, if that's the outcome, then we would be pro the change, because that would be great. But we haven't even had one World Cup final, and that it's only it's about to happen in a few hours. So, and as for the negatives, at the moment they're just perceived negatives, because what we're doing is we're remembering the classic Ray Sugimoto Grindelwald top, the classic Rustem Galmanov Innsbruck 2015 top. We're remembering Melissa Lenev taking 8.5 minutes on one attempt in Haiyang a couple of years ago, and those were thrilling TV because you knew, and thrilling to be there, of course, because we have a different world where we are at the comps, and that's going to be a shame. I mean, in some ways, one thing that it brings, which I think the audiences will quite like, is, for instance, in Kazo last year, when Fanny Gobert had a couple of goes on a problem and then sat on the mats for about 2.5-3 minutes, And the guy's problem had been fast, and all they had was 2.5 or 3 minutes of an athlete sitting there before she had one last go and fell off after a couple of holds anyway.
Yeah.
So we're actually doing there are negatives to both systems, and the biggest one is we're resistant to change, which is why this one's kicked up a stink. And we are, as I said, we're unsure of the due diligence that's been done on it. But I'm open to it. If it brings more into the sport, then, but we have to see if it works.
All right.
If it works, I don't have a problem with it, but since I don't think it's going to work on its own, I think it's just going to be some negatives and not that many positives. And I don't know if they really thought about this or just some happy idea that someone had. And less time and a fixed amount of time is going to make it the total a fixed amount of time. But that's the issue for me is I'm really skeptical about how this rule is going to make the final more predictable, because I've seen so many finals with those dead moments in which nothing is really happening. It's not that someone is climbing too much, it's that nothing happens. So unless they fix all those things, and it should be easy to fix, but it has nothing to do with the 4 minutes plus.
All right. Finally, this year is looking like it'll be another record-breaking year for the number of athletes competing in the events. With today 115 men and 77 women here in Meiringen. That means more, if not all, of the qualifying rounds requiring multiple flights to accommodate all of the climbers. Do we need to make changes to how athletes qualify for these events, or should we start trying to improve each event so that the capacity can handle larger numbers of climbers more fairly?
That's a really hard one. And on one hand, you could change the format and maybe make them climb less problems, but that increases the randomness of the round. But I mean, limiting, maybe you can just put a limit of 4 climbers per country, something like that. But for instance, last year in Munich, we had to start the round started at 8 or something like that. And also that changes a lot the conditions for some problems, especially if they are in an outdoor venue. And that's also unfair for the climbers who don't have a ranking, and they have to climb last, and they face a wall that is really, really hot compared to the climbers that climbed at 8 in the morning. It was quite chilly. So.
Yeah, I mean, you've kind of opened a can of worms, but also a very topical subject. And my personal belief, and this is me speaking as the circuitclimbing.com, not as the IFSC, because I take photos for the IFSC, but in no other way am I a decision maker in any way, shape or form. But when the field cuts were originally designed, that was when bouldering especially was a much smaller sport. So to go to 20 for semis and 6 for finals reflected the field sizes of 2004, 2005, whatever it may have been. Now in 2017 we're seeing, for instance, the maximum group size before they split the men's and women's is around 50 climbers. But in somewhere like Munich, or even here with the guys, you're getting to the point where you split into 2 groups, but then you've got to say, well, even those groups are over the maximum allowable group size. So what happens then? 3 groups, 4 groups? Because then it's 5 per group. So my answer, because most climbers are here a day before anyway, and my actual belief is that we hold quarterfinals, that we take the top 20 or 25 men, the top 20 or 25 women, and they go into from each group. So it would be, a total of 50 athletes go through to a quarterfinal to vie for 20 or 26 places, whatever it may be, for a semi-final. And I would also question 6 for the final, if lead can have 8, and we are a bigger sport, let's face it. We have the biggest viewing audience, we're more appealing, we're just more fun. Come to an after party one time, you'll find out about that. And yes, I know that's going to put onus on the route setters. Yes, I know that's going to put onus on the organisation. But if you've got 250 plus climbers paying €100 or whatever the entry fee may be, there's obviously revenue coming in. If we can get the venues for another few days for route setting, and another day of competition, I think it'd improve for show all round.
Currently with the flights, most of the walls that the World Cups are happening on weren't really designed for to handle multiple flights, and so you deal with most problems not being on the same angles. Generally, you're not dealing with anywhere near the same holds. That's obviously an institutional change where you would have to change rules and give organizers a lot of lead time, and some organizers may have to drop out. Is that something that the IFSC should start looking at for the next couple of years, just as a basic step that we see problems with right now?
Well, one of the things we have is we don't know what the IFSC is already looking at. Because of the lack of transparency, it's the same as us finding out about the 4-minute rule very recently, or the broadcast rule very, very recently. It could well be that Jerome Meyer and the sporting group are already looking at options, but if they're not shared with us, it's hard to say. And I mean, it's interesting, and sorry, I'm going to derail you slightly here, that you talk about, for instance, uneven holds and things like that, because in the last few years there's been a prevalence of PU holds in these competitions, and myself, I get a lot of feedback from top athletes that the PU holds go off over the course of a round far more than a PE hold. And the advantage of PU is, in a repeated setting situation, they last longer in gyms and stuff, but the actual lifespan of the hold in terms of usability is lower. They hold chalk more, and they heat up under artificial lighting, which means that you'll see climbers early in a group be able to go up a campus, a crimp ladder, and later in the group guys will be dry firing left, right and centre just trying to hold them. So maybe we have to look at hold construction. We have to look at a lot of elements.
Yeah, and as Eddie said, the problem is that we don't know what the IFSC does or what they think or what they are up to. They live in their ivory tower, and suddenly they drop some some knowledge onto us, and they say, okay, now the rules are completely different. And for instance, the rule book wasn't published. The 2017 rule book was published like less than a month ago. And I mean, everyone knew about the change with the 4 minutes, but you should publish the rulebook at least a couple of months before that year starts.
Yeah.
And so yeah, should they think about this? I hope they are already thinking about this, because we see this coming. I mean, this is not news. They've seen Munich growing year after year. So what do they do otherwise? Obviously, they have to be thinking hard about all this stuff, and I hope they are.
Yeah. I'll give you the option if you guys want to add any final thoughts. Feel free. If not, I'm just going to take a blank second and then call it.
My final thoughts are that for all the chaos and confusion, climbing, and especially competition climbing, is as healthy as it has ever been. And it's very easy for us to dwell on the negatives of the current situation and have a bit of a knee-jerk reaction and go, we're going to throw our toys out of the pram. But we're all here because we love climbing, and we need to work constructively as media, along with the athletes, along with the event organisers, and along with the IFSC, to work resolutions for all these things. And whether that means in time that we change the structure of the IFSC to have more input from event organisers, from media, and of course from athletes, I think there should possibly be a coaching representative in the IFSC as well as just an athlete's representative, because the way coaches are dealt with and work at competitions is quite tricky. I think there should also be a media representative from the media, not a media representative who is an IFSC manager of the media. But these are changes that will take time, but I think we're a healthy sport, we're a happy sport, we're a growing sport. Teething problems happen, and this is my one contentious statement, is we need to have a higher self-esteem for us as a sport. We need to have a higher self-esteem for ourselves as a sport. I've used the analogy several times where you really get the feeling that climbing thinks it is so lucky to be here that we bend over backwards to make concessions. And we don't need to do that. We can stand up and say we are a big sport. We have a massive following of viewers online. We have a massive following of people watching in gyms. Climbing gyms are growing everywhere. We need to actually go, we are not an ugly duckling. We are not a halfway sport. We are a real sport, and treat us as such. Because if we continue to go, oh, we're small, we're little, we're going to get bullied by media, we're going to get bullied by organisations, and the climbers aren't going to get their worth.
Well, that's a lot of great food for thought. I know you guys are busy. I hope you guys have a great time at finals. Your coverage so far has been excellent, so thank you for that, and thank you for talking to me.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's episode of Plastic Weekly. Thanks to Graeme Alderson, Eddie Fowke, and Angel Palacio for spending their time to answer my questions in Meiringen. Our theme music is by Javelin, with additional music this week by BIT. Plastic Weekly is currently self-funded, and we're not airing ads just yet, so please support it by subscribing on iTunes or Google Play, leave it a good review, and share it with your friends. You have no idea how much it means to the podcast. And special thanks to the few people that have left 5-star reviews. We now have an official rating in the iTunes store, and that just freaks me out. I don't know what's going on, but I really appreciate it. Keep up the great work. It makes me feel like what I'm doing is worth it. You can find more information and relevant links about this episode at plasticweekly.com, and you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can send me an email to tyler@plasticweekly.com with your comments, questions, compliments. Just tell me you're out there. Somewhere. And this episode is dedicated to Siobhan Koo, who I've had the pleasure of working with for the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm going to miss her a lot as she moves on to her next job. Good luck, Siobhan, and thanks for keeping me company at the gym for the last little bit. We'll see the rest of you on Thursday.
Yeah, sure. My name is Eddie Fowke from the Circuit Climbing, and I'm still Eddie Fowke from the Circuit Climbing. And one last time before I get a bad case of schizophrenia, I am definitely Eddie Fowke from the Circuit.
Are you sure about that?
I think so. Maybe I'm Josh Lart. No, I'm not that good looking.